My name is Nora Callahan. I am 33 years old. And the Tuesday night a text message landed on my phone that was never meant for me was the night I finally understood that being useful to someone is not the same as being valued by them. The text came in at 9:48 p.m. My father had meant to send it to my brother Garrett. He typed the wrong name in his contacts. My name and Garrett sit 2 entries apart, and my father has never adjusted the font size on his phone despite my mother asking him to for 2 years. The message read, "Your sister is too much. We're done pretending it doesn't affect the whole family." I read it on my couch, in the dark, with the television still on behind me. I put the phone screen down on the cushion beside me. I did not call my father. I did not send a reply. I sat in the dark for a while with the television going, and then I got up, went to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and stood at the counter drinking it slowly. What my parents did not know, what neither of them had thought to ask about in 3 years of monthly payments, was that I was the one keeping their mortgage current. I should tell you how that started because it did not start dramatically. My parents bought their house in 1999, a 3-bedroom colonial on a street called Durwood Lane in the kind of suburb that looks permanently settled from the outside. My father worked in regional sales for a building supply company for most of my childhood. My mother worked part-time at a dental office doing insurance billing. They were not people who talked about money openly, which in practice meant they did not talk about it at all, including during the years when they probably should have. My father was let go from his sales position in the autumn I turned 23. I was 2 years into a job as a loan processor at a regional mortgage company, and I understood, in precise and practical terms, what a sudden income loss meant against a fixed monthly obligation. My parents did not have substantial savings. They had a mortgage with 11 years left on it and a monthly payment of $1,847, which my father's severance would cover for 4 months, and then would not. My mother told me about the job loss on a Sunday phone call, in the same tone she used to relay mild neighborhood gossip. She said my father was going to take a little time before looking for something new. I asked her what that meant for the mortgage. She said they were figuring it out. I knew what figuring it out meant in my family. It meant that nothing would be figured out until something went wrong, and then whoever was closest to the problem would absorb the impact quietly. I was working with mortgage files every day. I had processed enough late payment flags to know exactly what the timeline looked like. 30 days past due, a late fee. 60 days, a formal notice. 90 days, the beginning of foreclosure proceedings. I had seen it happen to clients who had more cushion than my parents. 3 months after my father's job ended, I set up an automatic transfer from my checking account to my parents' mortgage servicer. The amount was $1,847. I set it to process on the 28th of every month, 4 days before the due date. I did not tell my parents I had done it. I told myself it was temporary, that my father would find something, that my mother's hours would increase, that the arrangement would resolve itself within 6 months, and I would quietly cancel the transfer, and no one would need to know it had ever existed. My father found part-time consulting work 8 months later. It paid roughly 60% of his previous salary. My mother's hours did not increase. I did the arithmetic, and I did not cancel the transfer. That was 3 years and 2 months before the Tuesday night of the text message. I want to be precise about my family structure because I think it explains the text without excusing it. I am the middle of 3 children. Garrett is 4 years older than me. My younger sister Becca is 3 years younger. In the cosmology of my family, Garrett is the one who moved away and therefore gets discussed as though distance confers achievement. Becca is the one who stayed close to home and therefore gets discussed as though proximity confers devotion. I live 40 minutes from my parents, which is near enough to be called on and far enough to be overlooked at holidays. I am also the one who reads contracts. In a family that does not talk about money, the person who reads contracts occupies an uncomfortable position, needed, but not comfortable to need. My parents called me when there was paperwork. They called Garrett when there was news to share. They called Becca when they wanted company. The division was so settled by the time I was in my late 20s that none of us questioned it, including me. The mortgage was not the only thing. There was the health insurance gap the year my mother's employer changed plans, and a 3-month window opened where her prescriptions were not covered. I paid $340 out of pocket for 2 refills and did not mention it. There was the property tax shortfall in my parents' second year without my father's full income, $2,190, paid from my savings account in November, filed under a mental category I had labeled temporary. There was the car repair for Becca, $780, the winter she was between jobs. There's the plane ticket for Garrett's 40th birthday trip that my parents wanted to give him, but could not cover alone. I put in $400 and my name did not appear on the card. None of these things were asked for dramatically. They were mentioned in passing, the way my family mentioned most things that needed doing, in the tone of someone noting that a task exists without quite directing it at anyone in the confidence that it would be handled. It was always handled. By me. I had stopped keeping a running total. I tell you this because it is important. I had stopped keeping track not because I was generous beyond accounting, but because accounting made the number too visible, and making the number visible meant confronting what it meant, and I was not ready to confront what it meant. The text message on a Tuesday in October made me ready. I went to work on Wednesday. I processed 4 loan files, attended a 40-minute team meeting about a new compliance software rollout, ate lunch at my desk, and answered 17 emails. On my drive home, I stopped at a grocery store and bought the things on my list. I made dinner. I watched television for an hour. At 9 o'clock, I opened my laptop. I pulled up my bank's payment portal, not my parents' mortgage servicer, but my own account, where the automatic transfer originated. I looked at the upcoming scheduled payment. 28th of the month. 11 days away. $1,847. I looked at it for a while. I did not cancel it that night. I closed the laptop, finished the water glass that was still sitting on the counter from the night before, and went to bed. Thursday, I called my friend Margot, who is a paralegal and the most organized person I know. Not for legal advice. I was not at that stage yet. I called her because Margot is one of the few people in my life who does not perform optimism at me when I tell her something difficult. I read her the text message. She was quiet for a moment. She said, "How long have you been paying their mortgage?" I said, 3 years and 2 months. She said, "Do you have records?" I said I had every bank statement going back to the first transfer, organized by month in a folder on my desktop labeled House. Do not delete. She said, "Okay. Don't do anything yet. Just sit with it." I sat with it through Thursday and Friday. On Saturday morning, I drove to my parents' house for the first time since the text, because my mother had already left a voicemail asking if I was coming for Saturday lunch, the way she did most weeks, in the same tone she had used before Tuesday, and apparently intended to continue using. I went. I sat at the kitchen table. I ate the soup my mother had made. My father talked about a local road construction project that had been inconveniencing his commute. My mother talked about a neighbor's renovation. No one mentioned the text. No one asked whether I had received something by mistake. No one's expression indicated that anything had shifted. I drove home afterward and sat in my car in the parking garage under my building for 11 minutes before going upstairs. That was when I decided. On Monday morning, I called an attorney named Daniel Firth, who specialized in real estate and family financial agreements. I had come across his firm 2 years earlier when a client at my job had used them for a property dispute, and I had noted the name with the vague, practical instinct of someone who works in an industry adjacent to property law and understands that knowing a competent real estate attorney is a reasonable thing. I explained the situation. 3 years of mortgage payments, totaling $72,243, made from my personal account to my parents' mortgage servicer, with no written agreement and no formal acknowledgement. I told him I had complete transfer records. I told him I was not seeking repayment. I told him I was seeking clarity. He asked what kind of clarity. I said, I want to know what my options are, and I want to know what a formal agreement documenting my contribution would look like, and I want my parents to understand, in writing with a third party present, what has been happening. He said that was straightforward. He said we could prepare a financial contribution acknowledgement, similar to a gift letter in structure, but documenting the ongoing nature of the payments and establishing my role as the de facto financial steward of the mortgage obligation. He said it would not give me an ownership interest in the property, which I told him I did not want, but it would create a clear, witnessed record of what I had contributed and formalize any future arrangement. He said, "What happens after that is up to the family conversation." I said, I understood. He worked through the week. On Friday afternoon, he emailed me a draft. I read it twice, made 2 small corrections to the dates, and confirmed it was accurate. He scheduled a meeting for the following Saturday. I called my mother on Wednesday evening and told her I needed to meet with her and my father on Saturday, that I had something I wanted to go over with them, and that I was bringing someone from an attorney's office. My mother said, "An attorney? Nora, is something wrong?" I said, "Nothing is wrong. I just need to have a conversation with you both about something, and I want it documented." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Should we be worried?" I said, "You should be at the house at 2 o'clock on Saturday." I ended the call before she could ask another question. On Thursday, my phone showed 3 missed calls from my mother and 1 from my father between 8 a.m. and noon. I was in back-to-back file reviews for most of the morning and did not see them until lunch. I sent my mother a text that said, "Saturday at 2. Everything is fine."
She did not call again that day.
My father did not call again either. I noticed the silence had a different texture than the usual silence, not the absence of contact, but the presence of waiting. On Friday evening, the day before the meeting, my phone rang at 7:15. It was Garrett. My brother and I speak perhaps 4 times a year. He lives in another city, works in pharmaceutical sales, and maintains a relationship with our family that is cordial and largely ceremonial. He calls at major holidays and on birthdays, and occasionally when our mother has asked him to call, which I can usually identify because the call begins with him asking how I am doing in a tone that is slightly more careful than his usual register.
This call began that way.
He said, "Hey, Mom called me. She said you're bringing a lawyer to the house tomorrow." I said, "An attorney?" "Yes." "What's going on?" I said, "I'll explain tomorrow." "Are you going to be there?" "I live 6 hours away, Nora." "I know where you live." There was a pause. He said, "Is this about money?" I said, "It's about a conversation that should have happened a long time ago." He said, "Mom is pretty upset." I said, "I'll see you if you come. If you can't make it, I'll fill you in after." I ended the call. I made dinner. I went to bed at 10 and was asleep by 10:30, which is not something I would have predicted, but I have noticed the decisions made clearly tend to produce that particular kind of quiet. Garrett was not there on Saturday. Becca was. I had not called her, but my mother had, and Becca arrived 20 minutes before 2 o'clock in the particular state of agitation she gets when she feels something is happening that she was not informed about in advance. She was standing in the kitchen when Daniel Firth and I came through the front door. Daniel in a gray blazer with a document folder, me in the navy coat I wear to work, carrying my own folder with the bank statements organized by year. My mother met us at the door. Her expression was the one she uses when she is managing something she does not yet understand, a surface calm over a visible effort. My father was seated at the dining table, which my parents had extended with a leaf they only use for Thanksgiving. 4 chairs on one side, 2 on the other. We sat. Daniel on my left, Becca across from me, next to my mother, my father at the head. Daniel introduced himself. He explained his role, that he was there as a neutral documenting party, not as an adversary, and that the purpose of the meeting was to create a clear record of a financial arrangement that had been operating informally for the past 3 years. My father said, "What financial arrangement?" I placed the folder in the center of the table. 38 bank statements, each one showing a transfer of $1,847 on or around the 28th of the month. Payee, the mortgage servicer. My account number in the originating field. My father picked up the top statement.
He looked at it.
He put it down and picked up the one beneath it. My mother said, "Nora, what is this?" "Those are the payments I've made on your mortgage," I said. "Every month for 3 years and 2 months. The room was quiet in a way that had weight to it. My father set down the second statement. His hand stayed on the table beside it, very still.
"We didn't ask you to do that," my mother said.
"I know," I said. "You were figuring it out." She looked at me. Something moved across her face that was not an expression I had a name for. "Nora." "I'm not here to argue about it," I said. "I'm here because I want it documented." Daniel has prepared an acknowledgement that records the payment history and establishes what I've contributed. I'm asking you both to sign it. My father said, "Why?" I said, "Because 2 weeks ago you sent me a text that was meant for Garrett, and it said you were done pretending I wasn't too much. And I want to make sure that going forward, everyone in this family has an accurate picture of what I contribute to it." The silence after that was different from the silence before it. Becca, who had not spoken since we sat down, looked at my mother. My mother's hands, which had been folded on the table, separated. My father's jaw shifted slightly, the way it does when he is recalibrating. He said, "That text was." "I know what it was," I said. "It wasn't meant for me. I understand that. But I received it, and I read it, and I'm not able to unread it." Daniel slid the acknowledgement across the table. My mother did not pick it up immediately. She looked at it the way you look at something you are not sure you want to touch. "If I sign this," she said, "what does it mean?" "It means the record exists," I said. "It means that if the arrangement continues, we all understand what the arrangement is. And it means that if I decide to change the arrangement, you have 30 days notice and a documented history to take to whatever resource you need next." "Change the arrangement," my father repeated. His voice was even, but there was something underneath it that was not quite even. "You mean stop paying?" "I mean make a deliberate choice," I said, "instead of a default one." My father looked at the table. My mother looked at the acknowledgement. Becca said quietly, "Mom, sign it." My mother looked at her. Becca said, "She's been paying your mortgage for 3 years. Sign the paper." My mother picked up the pen. My father signed after her. His signature was slower than usual, more deliberate, as though he was watching his own hand. Daniel witnessed both signatures. He dated the document. He would file a copy with his office and send copies to all parties by certified mail within 5 business days. The meeting lasted 51 minutes. Afterward, my mother asked if I wanted to stay for coffee. I said no. I said I had things to do. I said I would call during the week. I shook Daniel's hand in the driveway. He said I had handled it well. I told him I appreciated his help. I drove home on surface streets instead of the highway, the way I do when I want the drive to take longer than it needs to. The automatic transfer processed on the 28th as scheduled. I had not canceled it, and I did not cancel it. The house payment cleared on time. What I did cancel, over the following 2 months, was the pattern of unasked for supplementary support. Not dramatically, I did not announce it. I simply stopped. The car insurance gap I had been quietly covering for Becca since she switched jobs ended at her renewal date. The streaming subscription I had added my mother to on my account, which she had never asked about and I had never mentioned, I removed in January. Small things. Invisible things. The kind that are only noticed by their absence. Becca noticed first. She called me in December and said, "Did your streaming thing change? Mom said her shows aren't loading." I said, "I simplified my subscriptions." Becca was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Okay." She did not push it. Becca is perceptive in a way that operates quietly, which is why her "sign it" at the table had landed the way it did. She had seen the folder before I opened it and understood what was inside before I said a word. My father called me on a Sunday in February, 6 weeks after the meeting. He called at 11 a.m., which is not a time he usually calls. We talked for 22 minutes, which is longer than our calls typically run. He did not mention the text message. He did not mention the mortgage directly. He talked about a project he had taken on through his consulting work, a facilities assessment for a small manufacturing company 2 counties over. He talked about it with a specificity I did not usually hear from him: square footage, HVAC systems, a loading dock situation that was more complicated than the client had represented. He talked the way a person talks when they have found something they are good at and are quietly glad about it. At the end of the call, before we said goodbye, he said, "Nora, I know I'm not good at, I know I don't always." He stopped. He said, "The thing with the text. I'm sorry you got that." I said, "I know." He said, I don't actually think you're too much." I said, "I know, Dad." I let it land without adding anything to it. He said goodbye. I said goodbye. I hung up and sat at my kitchen table for a while before I got up and made lunch. The mortgage has cleared every month since the signing. Daniel sends a brief check-in email every quarter. I reply with a single line confirming the arrangement is unchanged. My parent servicer has flagged the account as consistently current for the past 3 years, which means that if my parents ever needed to refinance or access a home equity line, the payment history would support it. They do not know that. I have not mentioned it. My father's consulting work expanded in the spring. He took on 2 additional clients and hired a part-time assistant to help with the documentation side. My mother called me in April to tell me he had bought her flowers for no particular reason, which she said had not happened in a long time. I said that was good. She said, "Things feel a little different lately." I did not ask her to elaborate. I said, "Good different or just different?" She said, "Good, I think. More honest." I said, "Good." I want to say something about the apology. My father's February phone call was not a full accounting. It did not name everything that had been unspoken, and it did not restore any of the $72,243 I had paid, and it did not mean that the family dynamic had been fundamentally restructured. What it was a sentence from a man who does not offer sentences like that easily, in a phone call he initiated on a Sunday morning, 6 weeks after signing a document that showed him what his silence had cost. I have thought about what I wanted from that call, and I think what I wanted was exactly what I got. Not repair, but legibility. I wanted my father to see the ledger.
He saw it.
Whether that changes anything going forward is a daily question, not a resolved one. I am not a person who believes that family dynamics are either fixed or fully transformed. I believe they shift incrementally in the direction of whatever the people in them are willing to sustain. What I am willing to sustain now is documented. What I am not willing to sustain is also finally visible. There is a copy of the signed acknowledgement in a folder on my laptop, next to the folder of bank statements I still keep organized by month. I have not needed to open it since the signing. I keep it the way you keep a document you hope you never have to use, not because you expect a crisis, but because having it means a crisis is not the same as a catastrophe. I also still have the text message. I have not deleted it from my phone. Not as evidence, not as grievance, just because occasionally when I am about to do something without saying so, I read it and ask myself whether I have communicated clearly enough about what I am doing and why. Most of the time lately the answer is yes. That is not nothing. There is a difference between being someone a family leans on and being someone a family sees. For 7 years, I was the first thing without being the second. The signed paper on my laptop did not close that gap entirely, but it named it, and naming something is its own kind of beginning. What I did with the mortgage portal on a Tuesday night in October was not revenge, and it was not rescue. It was the first deliberate choice I had made in 3 years about an obligation I had been treating as a given. The obligation did not disappear. I am still making the payment. But I am making it now as a decision with documentation, in a family that has at least one written record proving they know I make it. That distinction between a thing you do and a thing you have chosen to do is the only one that has ever actually changed anything in my life. The question I keep sitting with, and I am genuinely curious whether you have faced something like it, when my father said, "I'm sorry you got that," not "I'm sorry I sent it," not "I'm sorry it was true once," but "I'm sorry you received it," I said, "I know," and let him off the partial hook he had extended. There were 22 people at the table the day the document was signed if you count my parents, Becca, and Daniel, and I have thought many times about what Becca said in that moment. "Mom, sign it." And whether she said it because she understood what I had been doing, or because she wanted the meeting to end, or because she is the kind of person who recognizes when a thing simply needs to happen and says so. I still do not know. But I know that in the room where it mattered, when the silence was at its heaviest, she was the one who broke it, and she broke it in the right direction. Was that enough for you? Leave in the comments. I read them. If this one stayed with you, subscribe. A new story every week, and every one of them is about the work that goes unacknowledged until the day it stops being invisible. I will see you in the next one.